R.C. Davis, and we're gathered this afternoon here at the Carnegie International Center in New York City. And this is the final program of a series concerning the history of the Negro people. We've been to Africa, Latin America, various parts of the United States, looking for the evidence, seeking out the questions and some of the answers to see if perhaps the past could help us understand the present and the future. And today we want to explore the future of the Negro. That's what this program is about. And I have with me this afternoon some very distinguished panelists. On my right, His Excellency Chief Eso Adebo, Ambassador from Nigeria to the United Nations. Mr. Mr. Antonio Olento, writer and critic from Brazil. Dr. John Hope Franklin from the University of Chicago, historian. Dr. John A. Davis, President of the American Society on African Culture. Last but not least, certainly Mr. Basil Davidson, British Africanist, scholar, and writer. Gentlemen, excuse me, perhaps we'd do best to open our discussion on the future of the Negro by asking a hypothetical question. Does the Negro have a future? Suppose we begin with a stranger to our shores, Chief Adebo.
Well, this is quite a question, and it would take a very long time to produce a complete answer. I would say that any member of humanity has a future, and the question is, what kind of future? The Negro, like the Caucasian, has a future. What that future is going to be depends not only upon himself, but upon his fellow members of humanity. In the United States here, a great deal has been done to create an understanding of the position of the Negro, an acceptance in most places that he is just another section of humanity like the Caucasian, that he is entitled to the normal dignity of man, entitled to equal opportunities, and so on.
Mr. Ambassador, I understand that the word Negro is not a word that's used in Africa. Is that so?
It is not a word that is commonly used in Africa, because when you are all Negroes, you don't go about asking about Negroes and talking about Negroes. The question arises only if when you get into a place in which you form the racial minority. So we talk more and discuss more about the Caucasian and the future of the Caucasian than about the question of the future of the Negro, because over there we assume that the Negro, we take it for granted that the Negro has a future, and then we ask in that context, what is the future of the Caucasian? Over here, where the Negro is the racial minority, the topical question is the future of the Negro. And as a person working in the international sphere and believing honestly in internationalism, I now just ask myself, what is the future of the human race? And I think that is where we are all going. I hope that within a reasonably short time, we won't be asking one another what is the future of that particular race, but what is the future of the human race. And I submit that it is a question that is worth asking now in view of world developments.
Thank you.
I say,
Yes.
you don't mind if I say I say, please.
Not at all.
We're both named Davis. If I start calling you Mr. Davis, there'll be some confusion. I would like to say something about the future of the Negro in the United States. I think that Chief Adebo has said it correctly, but from the point of view of the American Negro, for the first time I'm bearish on this subject.
What do you mean by bearish?
Well, I think that I mean bullish. Bullish.
What do you mean by bullish?
I think that we're doing pretty well and we're going to do much better. My experience in fighting race questions goes back to '33 when and I've been doing it all my life, from organizing by-work and work movements fresh out of college through the New York State Commission Against Discrimination, Mr. Roosevelt's FEPC, and Mr. Harriman's SCAD, and so on. But at the present time, I think we've come to a place in America where all the structures, legal structures, at any rate, in the society, are all pointing in a positive fashion, and I might review a little of those. In the first place, our constitutional law now is completely square on this subject. The court has cleared our law of any distinctions on the basis of race, and cleared all state laws with regard to this. Secondly, we have in some 20 states, about 10 of which are really good on this subject, we have passed laws which provide for the administrative clearing up of discrimination. In other words, in the United States, in at least 20 states, you can go to you can file a complaint with an administrative individual, and then through the process of administrative adjudication against anybody, employer, labor union, person who owns housing, have that matter processed and eventually enforced in the courts in an equity proceeding. One of the great drawbacks to full status for the Negro in America was the rural power, especially in the South. And that's gone from America, and I assume will not come back, so that the dynamics of our politics is such that this course that we're on will, in all probability, stay. And so I think the future looks pretty good for the first time, and I think it's even better because of the nature of the international situation. By that I mean that most of the nations of the world have some kind of ethnic or racial problem or religious problem. And the whole world is going to have to face this question in various aspects. And as it does, the future of the Negro here and everywhere is going to be more and more assured.
Well, that's a very positive picture. I was just going to call on you, Dr. Franklin, to see if perhaps Dr. Davis didn't overlook something, or perhaps he didn't touch squarely on a point that you felt was relevant to this whole situation. Do you think it looks quite as bright as all of that?
I can't help saying that a historian perhaps shouldn't be here at all, because he does love to look back over his shoulder. I don't believe I'm quite as bullish as John Davis. And although I certainly would be the first to recognize all of the significant developments that he has so clearly outlined, I think that real and lasting, tangible change and improvement must have some other ingredients. I'm terribly excited. I'm terribly excited about all of the legislative and judicial developments that are of a positive nature. But I'm rather depressed about some other facets or aspects of the present position of the Negro in the United States. And it's these aspects that cause me to be a bit less bullish, if not exactly bearish.
Did you mention some of those aspects?
Professor Davis. Well, I'm not unaware of the fact that the general overall economic position of the Negro in the United States is not really improving. Despite the fact that there might be some significant improvement at certain levels, in certain areas, the fact remains that that with all of the remarkable economic progress that Americans are making today, the disparity between Negroes and whites, so far as national income and that sort of thing is concerned, is getting wider, greater instead of less. It's not merely the necessity for improving educational opportunities. It's not merely the intervention of government at the state and federal levels. It's indeed not merely the significant revision of the attitudes, let's say, of management or of the technicians, but it's something else, and this is the other thing that causes me to be somewhat bearish, if I may say so, and it is that we still have in this country, unfortunately, a fantastic residue of racism. Perhaps residue is not the right word because it is so large still that the implication that it's residue, which suggests that it's something left over, conveys the wrong impression. It is indeed, I think, still a part of the very fabric of this country.
Let's take another tack. There is a country in Latin America, South America, that has suggested that it has the solution to the Negro question. Would you care to tell us a little bit about that, Mr. Antonio Olento?
Yes, if your question was a teaser, I should like my answer to also be a teaser. What's the future of the Negro?
Yes.
And I say perhaps the future belongs to the mixed blood people.
You mean by that amalgamation, the
Yes,
mixing of the bloods?
Yes. And how? Because now we have the speediness of communication and transport and everything. And we have been trying for 4 centuries in Brazil to make this amalgamation. We are a mixed blood country. We have, for instance, now 85 million people. And of these 85 million people, we have 11 million Negroes. And we have 30 million mulattoes.
11 million Negroes.
Yes.
30 million mulattoes. Yes.
Yeah, this is the composition of our country. Now, to have this composition, in the last 4 centuries, since 1530 more or less, we start receiving slaves from Africa when Portuguese and Spaniards start making the slave trade. And we received more or less 8 million slaves between 1530 and 1860 more or less. For 3 centuries and 30 years, 330 years, we received around 8 million slaves. In the beginning of our independence, we had more or less 1/3 of the population was Negro. And now we are, little by little, mixing blood, making amalgamation, and trying to make them Brazilians. A friend of mine from Nigeria, the author Chinua Achebe, went to Brazil 2 years ago, and I showed him Rio de Janeiro and Bahia, and parts of the country in which the mulattoes are majority. And he told me, but you are destroying Africans and Negroes. I said, yes, and we are destroying whites too. We are destroying both sides of the problem.
Do you think this is the solution to the problem?
This is one of the solutions, and this is the solution we have, because just imagine this. Let's see the United States. You have here the whites, you have here the Negroes. Okay. And then the whites have this nation, the Negroes have this nation. And the Negroes then become richer and richer, become smarter and smarter and more intelligent, and professors, industrialists, and so on. And so what? In 50 years, in 100 years, you have 2 nations. Or you have only 1 nation. Because to have only 1 nation with 2 races, it is difficult. Not segregation. Segregation is something, but prejudice. Personal prejudice is always dangerous. Personal prejudice is like an allergy. I don't like yellow color, and so forth. I don't like yellow color. Or I don't like blue color. That's an allergy. And then we have to educate people not to have prejudice. They have to be educated. They have to be taught not to have prejudice against any color of skin. And if we don't educate, if we don't do this, All the other measures are wonderful, but they won't solve the problem.
Mr. Olento, is amalgamation the avowed policy of the government of Brazil?
No, this is as almost everywhere. This was a natural solution. It was not planned. No one planned it. It happened. But this amalgamation, this is perhaps the only answer to the problem, but it is an answer that cannot be imposed. No government can impose this answer to the problem. No government can have this official policy.
May I hold this for just a moment so that our courtesy may be complete and universal? We'll get back to this in just a moment. Mr. Basil Davidson.
I found myself rather inclining to agree with John Hope Franklin, because after all, what we're talking about, I think, is not the long-range eventual future of this or that section of the human race, what's going to happen in the next 10 years. And I, speaking as an Englishman, must say that I think we're now getting to the point of self-fulfillment among the peoples of African descent, where the problem really begins to get extremely difficult, not necessarily for them, but for the rest of us. And that makes me rather bullish. Bearish, I'm sorry, the other way around. Bearish. I don't know which it is.
Why are you bearish on that?
I'm bearish for this reason, that in my country, we have now done a thing which we've never done before, and which seems to me a most deplorable and indeed cowardly retreat from good sense, and that is we have applied immigration restrictions to those people of color, to immigrants of color, that is to say to people from the Commonwealth who come from India or Pakistan or the West Indies, and it's above all bad for those from the West Indies, since many of them still are, after all, British colonial subjects. And we've done this out of a sense of panicky and I think shameful retreat in the face of a vociferous and I think unrepresentative minority. Now, we still have got in England, I think, a strong residue, or at any rate, a residue of anti-racialism, I would put it that way around. And I hope that this is going to be strong enough to produce counsels of good sense. The fact remains that at the moment, we in my country have applied restrictions on a racial basis for the first time. And this makes me think that the immediate future is going to be much more full of controversy, conflict and struggle than the last 10 or 15 years has been. You see, as far as England is concerned, the English like to pat themselves on the back. Well, after all, we all like to do that, I suppose, because they think that they have been statesmanlike in withdrawing without too much difficulty. I hope that the Chief of Deba will agree with this. Without too much difficulty in withdrawing from a number of African countries which were previously colonies. And this did, of course, produce a sort of euphoria, and the strong residue of anti-racialists began to feel that they, in fact, were a majority. And now comes along this very great setback, and I think it should be realized that it is a great setback in which the government, and a Labour government too, which should have known better, retreats from good sense and applies racial restrictions at the very time when we are actually short of labour. Now, this is, to my way of thinking, a sign that, as far as my country is concerned, that we have to think about the immediate future with a good deal of anxiety.
Well, let me, since this bearish...
Let me just add, if I may,
yes,
that as far as amalgamation is concerned, it may or may not be a good thing, and I'm certainly not going to say anything against it, but I think that Dr. Olento will agree that it isn't a very short-range solution. It's taken quite a long time, as far as I know, for Brazil to reach the point where it has reached now in this statesman-like policy, if I can call it statesman-like policy. It's going to take much longer to complete it, and as far as my country is concerned, we haven't got very far yet in that direction.
Let me, bearish and bullish, let me say that I was talking about which way we were going in the future. I was trying to indicate the forces that have been set in motion in the general direction. I don't mean there won't be trouble along the way. How can you say that with riots in Newark and Washington and Los Angeles?
Chief Adebo, and then Dr.
There are just one or two points that I'd like to take up from the points made by my colleagues on this panel. Now, I myself don't feel that the future is going to be exceedingly rosy. As I indicated before, I think it's going to depend not only upon upon curing the prejudiced Caucasian of his prejudice, it's also going to depend upon what we make of opportunities, what is made of opportunities which American Negro leaders here are securing for the Negro community. It's going to depend upon what special measures are made to tide over a transitional phase during which you have a backlog of underprivileged position. I'm very glad that Dr. Franklin pulled us back from a position of near complacency, because the future isn't going to be easy at all, because when you have a problem such as this, the more victories you win, the harder it is to get over the next fence, naturally. And I do not confine myself in my thinking to the position of the American Negro. What about the Negroes in South Africa, where it is policy to discriminate against them? How are we going to get over that one? Now, the same people, the same white people in America, for instance, who are prepared to do something about removing racism from the American scene, have not shown the same anxiety to help remove racism from the South African scene. And of course, we in Africa don't deceive ourselves into thinking that racism is a disease only in America. We know that this thing, if you scratch further enough into any Caucasian skin, the thing is still there. In some cases, you have to scratch a lot deeper than in others, but the thing
You
is...
think this is universally true, Chief?
I think it is universal. I wouldn't say universally true, because I have met fine fellows, Caucasian friends, in the United Kingdom, among Frenchmen, among Americans, Brazilians and others, who seem to me to have got away completely from this. But I don't think you can go in terms of countries in this, because in every country, not only in Britain, in every country where you have the white and the black working together, you get the same discrimination, subtle or overt. Very subtle in some cases, very overt in some other cases, but nevertheless, it sometimes is there. Take the case of Brazil.
I was hoping you would take that case.
It is because it is a very interesting case, and I think that they have an experiment there that is worth watching. I wouldn't say more than that. I don't think that miscegenation, because I don't think that miscegenation is the full answer. It is part of the answer. No doubt that you should give people freedom to marry whomever they like. You can't impose it, but you give them complete freedom. Now, but it's not the full answer, because, as was pointed out by John Davis, it is unfortunately the case that in certain parts of Brazil, the Negro and his status are easily identifiable from the white members of the community and their status, particularly their economic status. And they have, I don't think, if they have to wait for miscegenation to solve that one, they'll have to wait a long, long time, longer than we, whose brethren are at the receiving end, are prepared to condone.
Chief, I'd like to point out that also that is quite common in where you have this going on, to then substitute discrimination by color gradation. You know, I mean, you go all the way from pure white to all the way through the whole thing.
I want to say one thing about Brazil, because I concede to the Brazilian that they are not race conscious in the way that some others are race conscious, but I'm still looking forward to the time when one of their senior diplomats in the United Nations will be a person of my color.
Mr. Olento, you seem to be the focal point of some interesting speculations. One, he said, I'd like you to treat this one in particular and then go on to the others. He said that, you know, in scratching most any Caucasian, if you scratch deep enough, you would come across this residue or remnant of racism. Would you say that is true in Brazil to a more or less extent? And if true, is amalgamation making that less true?
Yes, first of all, I told that as a teaser answer, but of course amalgamation is not the full answer, but it shows a spirit. It shows a spirit, and this spirit is the answer. In a country where a community is so easy to marry among races, it's so easy to amalgamate, this spirit may make it easier to solve the racial problem, not only the amalgamation. Now, we have a racial prejudice in Brazil, of course. If we scratch, we find, especially in the wealthier resorts, in Copacabana Beach, if you go to Santos and Guarujá Beach, the people where wealthy people are, and for instance, I don't know, Catherine Dunham went in 1951 to a very, very luxurious hotel in São Paulo, and she was denied entrance. Of course, the man was arrested, because we have a law. But to arrest him, in this law, any citizen should go and make the as we call, and make the accusation, may start the issue against him. And they found out it was a poor doorman who didn't know anything about that. So the poor doorman who was the one who denied it, they said denied it was not a doorman, it was someone in the hotel, of course. But they say
that's the way we do it in our country.
Yeah. Then we have it. For instance, Copacabana. Copacabana is a place where the wealthy people go to sunbathe and things like that. And we are changing that now. Yes. We are changing that now. Just see the importance of an independent Africa. Now we have 30 Negro countries in the world. They are 30 votes in the United Nations. They are 30 votes in UNESCO. They are 30 votes in the World Wealth Organization. So in terms of international policy, things have changed. And they have changed all over the world on account of that. In Brazil, for instance, we have no prejudice, but the prejudice that we have, it is less now. Because, for instance, now, if we go to Copacabana Palace Hotel, a very well-dressed Negro, they say, maybe an ambassador. Things began to change. And now, when we have discussions and symposiums and or colloquies in Brazil, every African ambassador is invited because they represent something. They are the symbol of that race that was a slave in Brazil for so many centuries. And now not only they are trying to get better themselves in their country, Brazil, but the descendants of their ancestors are ambassadors and presidents.
I want to get to a subject in a short while, which will, which comes from a statement you made a short while ago, Chief Adebo. But before I do that, you raised another question which brings us to our distinguished panelists from Britain. You raised the question of what's happening in South Africa. And I think, Mr. Davison, you have been to South Africa, you've written about it. I'd like to find out from you, what is the racial situation in South Africa? I'd like also to find whether you think the Negro in particular in this country can do more to help Negroes in South Africa? And should they do more to help Negroes in South Africa?
Well, the racial situation in South Africa is chronically bad. It's now 14 years since I was there. That's not entirely my fault, since they were good enough to deport me in 1951. And then, needless to say, the very fact they deported me is evidence, I hope, the racial situation was bad in South Africa. Since then, I think we can say that it has got year by year worse. And the reason why it persists is simply that the white minority have sufficient force to impose their rule upon a very large non-white majority, to the point where it's difficult to see how those Africans will be able, at least in the near future, to liberate themselves. They have tried and they will continue to try, but every effort that they make is visited by the most savage, barbaric sanctions and repression on the part of the minority which holds power. Now, the reason why the minority continues to hold power is not simply, of course, that they have all the weapons, all the arms, all the posts of importance in the state. It's also because they have been able to count upon completely loyal support from those great nations of the West.
Which nations?
The United States. I'll mention them, don't worry. Nobody's being let off the hook at the moment, don't worry. The United States in the first place, and my own country in the second. Now, the power of the white minority in South Africa rests upon its capacity to call upon the financial and capital aid of the United States and Britain, and indeed of some other countries, notably in the last 5 years of Western Germany, which is perhaps the third most important country in this respect, and to some extent, to a much lesser extent, to France. So long as these 2 or 4 countries, if you like, you can add Belgium and a few other countries, but as long, let's limit it to the real culprits. That's my country and yours. So long as those 2 countries are in fact, no matter what they may say in public, and no matter how they may vote in the United Nations, so long as those 2 countries are solidly behind the South African government in all its economic manifestations of its life, so long as that is so, then we betray any hope there may be of even a minimal improvement. I don't speak even of the large-scale human liberation of the Africans in South Africa, but even a minimal improvement remains impossible so long as that is the case. And if you ask me, can the Negroes of the United States, or Afro-Americans, as I've been told I should call them, can they do anything to help? Yes, they can. But this is not, of course, a racial question. This is a human question. And the answer must be that everyone who realizes what the situation is and feels it is bad, it is hard to see how any honest person can realize what the situation is and not feel that it's bad, no matter what in the famous formula their race, creed, or color may be, then they must, of course, bring the maximum pressure to bear upon their own people. And this is very difficult, because here we get into the basic difficult questions of our time. What is the Western economic system? The free enterprise system, the capitalist system, if you like, rests upon the kind of operations which are keeping in power that very minority which is visiting on its majority such horrible, such barbaric and indeed unspeakable sufferings. And therefore it's not easy to see how this change will come, but I am perfectly convinced it will come. And I think that the long-range answer to the big question which you, Mr. Davis, posed at the beginning, what is the future of the Negro, is really what is the future of the system in which we, all of us, live. Can this system adjust itself to the point where the liberation, for instance, of the Africans of South Africa, not to speak of those of African descent in the United States and elsewhere, can it adjust itself to the point where this becomes possible? That's a question that I throw back at you.
Well, this is a question for you, Dr. Franklin, but let me load it a little further. Now, the Afro-American Negro, as you might choose, is in a position at this moment when he hopes to be included in the greater society. And sometimes we will pay the price for that inclusion by keeping quiet about the nature of this particular system. We are so happy to become members of our society that we will blink our eyes at the kind of treatment that society, by its support of the oppressive government, say, of South Africa, is handing out. Now, not only will we do that sometimes, but sometimes if we feel that our society does not like that we are as open and as friendly to our African brothers as we might want to be, it is possible we are tempted even then not to be. You can understand economic pressure, social pressure, and all of these things in operation. Now, this brings up the question of the relationship between the Afro-Americans and the Africans. Now, obviously, all of us Afro-Americans have suffered from the kind of historical picture and distortion of Africa that has been fed to us through the generations. We were taught deliberately to hate, to deny, to despise our African ancestry and those people who were still unfortunate enough, we thought, to be caught over there still. We were taught that they would have been lucky had they come over when we did and left all the bananas and the monkeys and the torrid climate. We are beginning to learn differently. But I'd like Dr. Franklin to talk to us a little bit about what the Afro-American or the Negro now thinks about Africa.
Mr. Davis, there's so much I want to say, and I know that you aren't going to let me say everything. I don't really know where to start. The first thing I want to say is that we have been able to build up still another myth with all the myths that we have constructed over the past years regarding the American Negro's relationship to Africa. I think we ought to remember, and a countryman of yours and a good friend of mine helped to remind us several years ago when he published his book called Independent African, the story of the Nyasaland uprising. We ought to remember that the involvement of the American Negro in the future, in the present and future of Africa goes back to more than a century when Negroes in this country couldn't help themselves. They were involved and interested in the development and improvement of Africa in sometimes the crudest and most unrefined and very undeveloped manner, but still through pennies, through churches, through communications of one kind or another, through missionaries, through educational activities and so forth. American Negroes have for a century been interested in the development of Africa and have been supporting its future. And I think this ought to be a part of our record. Now, so far as the present is concerned, I think that American Negroes obviously have recognized, first of all, the remarkable thrust forward that the emergence of these many nations, Dr. Olento mentioned, has meant. I mean, the significance of it is unimaginable. It's so tremendous, not merely in terms of impressing the entire world with the fact that Negroes are capable now of managing their own affairs as they were in the days that Basil Davidson talks about in his Lost Cities of Africa and his Mother Africa and other books. But also that perhaps in terms of the American Negro's role, he will have a future similar to that the people of Africa now are having for themselves. In other words, they recognize the important impact that the new position of Negroes in Africa can have in terms of themselves. And it's not altogether, therefore, unselfish that they wish for them the very best in every way. I remember, Dr. Olento, that marvelous cartoon of Herblot's not many years ago, which I hope would not be true now, but he depicted a dark woman and man trying to get service in a restaurant. And Washington, and they were just about to be thrown out when the manager rushed up to the waiter and said, "Don't throw them out. They aren't American Negroes." Now, I'm sure that the solution of Route 40, John Davis was talking about the other day when we were attending a conference in Denmark, and the solution of a number of American Negroes' problems here at home comes from the impact of Negroes, of Africans, on our own racial situation. American Negroes appreciate that, and so far as the attitude then of young American Negro students is concerned, I suppose that there is the usual and normal cordiality, always, shall we say, Mr. Ambassador, moderated by the normal competition and indeed jealousy that might arise from the presence of someone so exotic as to take one American Negro's girlfriend away from him. I suppose you might get some competition there and some jealousy, but I don't think that there's any real hostility. Now, the other point that one has to remember, I told you not to start with. The other point that one has to remember is that when an American Negro and a young man or a young woman from Africa or Nigeria, whatever country you want to mention, get together, it's not just natural that they will love each other, for they come from entirely different backgrounds, different orientations, different sets of values and everything else. They do have some affinities, but it has to be cultivated and developed, and it has to be worked at. If they merely assume that because they're both black they're going to love each other, then they're off, I think, on the wrong foot. But if they assume that they are two human beings from two wonderful backgrounds, somewhat different, that perhaps ought to get to know each other better, then I think they might.
Thank you, Dr.
Do
Franklin.
you mind if I add just a rider there?
Very briefly, we have one moment.
I assure you it will be very brief, but I cannot allow this speech of Dr. Franklin to go without my acknowledging the submission that he made and taking that opportunity to pay a highly deserved tribute to the contribution which American Negroes have made over the years to the development of the independence movement in Africa. I think that they did make a very sterling contribution indeed, and that contribution is still proceeding on the part of American Negro leadership. I myself attended a conference in Washington last year which was called by American Negro leaders not to discuss civil rights in the United States, but to discuss how they can help to persuade their government to take more genuine interest in the economic development of the African continent. The only thing that I think we must work on both sides, both in Africa and here, so that this interest that American Negro leaders take in Africa and that African leaders take in the colored movement everywhere should go right to the grassroots, and that this understanding of the community of interest that we share should go right down to the rank and file of the Negroes in America and of the African people in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
We pause briefly for station identification. This is National Educational Television.
And now, the last third of the program is devoted to questions from the audience. You may ask questions of any of us on the platform here. If you'll just rise, state your name, make your way to the microphone, state your name, and let us have the questions. There are microphones available all over the place, and I'm sure you must have many unanswered questions about the future of the Negro in America and in the world, things that we didn't touch on, or things that we touched on wrongly perhaps. Questions from the floor.
My name is Mrs. Benaisa, and I should like to ask a question of Dr. Franklin. Dr. Franklin, do you feel that the youth of today is more disposed toward this spirit of which Dr. Olento spoke, this spirit toward integration and complete amalgamation, interracial marriage, and so forth? And do you feel that this would be an equitable and significant step toward the solution of those types of problems which we have not been able to legislate on and cannot be legislated out of existence?
I must say, I'm not quite so hopeful about amalgamation as Dr. Olento is. We've had it in this country for quite some time. Indeed, I would suppose offhand that our mixed population, in terms of numbers, would compare favorably with that of Brazil. That's just my offhand guess. One must remember that the situation was so bad or desperate or whatever you want to call it in the good state of Virginia in the 20th century that state has redefined what a Negro was twice in order to sort of cull out and purify the white population. In 1910, they redefined what a Negro was, and in 1930, they also did. And this was because we've had such an enormous program program, if you want to call it, but activity that has amalgamation. But Dr. Olento made another point that I think is very important. He says that alone won't do it. And you've got to do something in terms of developing some kind of respect of people for each other, which doesn't necessarily come with amalgamation.
You mentioned the
youth.
But
the youth, and that's what I want to get to. I think that the young people of today are much less inhibited, much less restricted by these and other restraining influences that our forebears imposed on us, whether they were white or Negro or what have you. I think that youth today are more independent, and I'm delighted that they are. The very fact that they feel free in this area is indicative of their also being willing to look at problems independently in other areas or in other ways. It's not that they simply are more willing to marry someone out of their race that gives me hope. It is that they regard this as irrelevant, as indeed I do. For as long, I think, as we can even talk about race as such, as long as we underscore Negro or white or any of the other, we're going to be having problems unless we can recognize the fact that color is irrelevant in human relations of any kind, marriage and otherwise. Unless we can do that, we haven't even begun to go beyond the Nuremberg laws, all of the other kinds of barbarities that have characterized some of our expressions in this area. So that our young people who simply say this is silly, I say bully for them. Not that I'm interested in who they marry. Goodness knows, how could I be? But I am interested in the kind of spirit that this represents, which I think is moving in the right direction.
Another question. Yes, sir.
My name is Keith Baird. I am a teacher of foreign languages and so very much interested in words and their meanings. My own feeling aside on the matter of Mr. Davidson's introduction of the word Afro-American into the discussion, I think it is true that words represent ideas and that ideas move men. I would like to know from any members of the panel who can enlighten us. I'm quite sure all of them can. But I'd like to ask this question. To what do you attribute the inclination to use the word Afro-American, and do you think that there is any augury of the increasing use of such a term instead of the word Negro? Thank you.
Well, if I may address myself to that, I think the increasing use of the word Afro-American represents two things. One, it is the recognition by the Negro or Afro-American population of the United States that there is a real vital tie between himself and those Africans in the mother country. It is the reestablishment of an umbilical connection that was deliberately cut off historically a long time ago. There is also, I think, a personal or psychological reason for the use of the term Afro-American as against Negro. Basically, in this country, we Negroes, Negro males in particular, are a rather emasculated breed of people. We represent a kind of crippling imposed on us by the Southern culture to the extent that our manhood, our capacity as men to defend our families or to head families or to found families was profoundly put in question by slavery and held in question even after slavery was over. Our women usually went out, could go out and earn livelihoods, whereas we couldn't. I think we need, the use of the word Afro-American is a psychological confession that the term Negro is no longer satisfactory to us. It describes what we were and perhaps still are, but what we would like no longer to be. We would like to be considered men, and this is one way of describing ourselves as men, I think.
Forgive me, Ambassador. I was struck by what you said, and I would like to ask you a question. If the word Negro has really little meaning in the United States, where else does it have any meaning? Have you, Ambassador, ever heard of any of your fellow countrymen thinking or calling themselves Negroes? I must say I've traveled in Africa a great deal, and I haven't heard this.
Yes. I don't think that if you travel through Africa, you will hear Africans calling themselves Negroes. Just as if you travel, as I have done, through Great Britain, you wouldn't hear the Englishman calling himself Caucasian because he's not thinking in such terms.
You think it was a red smear?
Now, no. The point I wish to make is this. You see, within the United States here, Afro-American can be a substitute term for the Negro. But the Negro is a term that covers more than the Afro-American. I use the Negro to cover my Afro-American brethren, my Brazilian brethren, my brethren in Ghana, my brethren everywhere else in the world where people of color may be domiciled for the time being. And when I went to a certain part of the United States just 3 months ago, I won't mention it in case people here don't share their particular point of view, and I suggested that as a means of trying to remove the misunderstanding between the African at home and the people of color abroad, we should have an Afro-Negro society. Well, I was told that, no, I said, no, not Afro-Negro, I said a Negro society that included everybody, and I was told quite seriously that the term Negro was opprobrious and that they did not use that term in these parts. And I said, well, it was a term that I gladly accept for myself, but of course, if there are large sections of the Negro community who don't like it, then it can only defeat my purpose if we use the term. But in that case, you must go and help me to find a term which would cover all of us. And I haven't had a further communication from that source, and it may be that the great professor will be able to find me such a term, because I have been looking for it. Afro-American is very nice if you are thinking of Americans of African ancestry. But if you are thinking of all of us, the whole Negro populations of the world, I'm in search of a word which will cover us all, just as I use the term Caucasian to cover the white people. So I think that both terms are very useful, and I do not see how we can avoid some generic term which will cover the whole of colored populations.
Thank you. Can we get perhaps to the next question?
My name is Jan de Ruth. I got up on impulse, but I'll ask the questions now. I have three short questions, two to Mr. Davis, Ossie Davis, and the last one to the pessimists on the panel. The first one is, if you'll find, or if we find a new name, don't we just extend the agony unnecessarily? I think, especially in America, if we, I'll ask them first, and perhaps you can answer them all at the same time. If we find a new name for Negro, whatever it may be, isn't it just an extension of the agony? The second question is, and again to you, if you know, or would know now, or would have known at your birth what you know now about life, about your life personally, and you would have the possibility of choosing your birthplace, what would your choice be? And then to the pessimists on the panel, since there has been a great deal of progress in the last 20 years compared to the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, do you think we can go back? Do you think that any form of segregation that has been eliminated can be brought back? These are the questions.
Well, since you directed yourself to me, while you gentlemen are thinking up your answers, I'll give mine. I recognize two things. One, the necessity for some change and the concept of myself and my people in this country, which leads us to search for a new designation. I also recognize the very stubborn nature of human nature. For instance, 6th Avenue is still not the Avenue of Americas, though it's officially changed. So I solved the problem for myself on a very personal level. I use the term Negro to designate those black people who came from Africa against their will, brought over by slavery. This is my definition, and it works for me. And the other part of that is, I figure that there is always the possibility that we can take this opprobrious word, this bone that has been thrown at us and thrown in our face, and with our particular genius and energy and love of life, make of it something so magnificent that they might want it back again, and we won't give it to them. It'll be something of our own then. Now, as to if I could go back in time and decide at which place I would like to be born, well, let's see now. I was born in a cotton patch in Cogdell, Georgia, and I imagine any other place would seem like heaven compared to that. That's as far as I care to go without advice of counsel. Now for the pessimist on the program. I practice pessimism, although I'm not definitely a pessimist. I think that there is always a possibility of retrogression in human affairs, and I think that before Hitler came, the Jews had achieved a tremendous degree of integration into German society, and none of them possibly would have thought that the horror of those camps would be visited upon them, that this kind of retrogression would happen. I do believe that men under pressure of circumstances will revert to most barbaric cruelty, and that those in their midst who are weak and defenseless will get it. And I don't care how far up we get as a race, until we can solve this problem and change these conditions we talk about, we are always vulnerable. Even now, as they say on the streets, we have integration at the top, but we have outegration at the bottom. But as faster than we can be integrated into the society, we are being computed out of it on the economic level. So I appreciate the progress we've made in 20 years, but I have my fingers crossed all along the line. Thank you. Any?
I don't count myself a pessimist, but I would just comment that I think it's conceivable that we might get into a situation where we would where the Negro's position is not secure in this country. if we can do what we did to the Japanese in 1941, I think this country is capable of doing almost anything. And it was strictly on the basis of the people being identifiable as possible subversives, despite the fact that there was no real reason for it. Now, if the color question becomes one of extreme polarity, as some countries of the world are seeking to make it now, and if any great struggle arises that might be interpreted as a racial struggle, international racial struggle, I don't know what that might do to the position of Negroes in the United States. If it makes that position at all untenable or weak, then of course it would certainly indicate that the position that there had not been any fundamental acceptance of the Negro as a person or as a citizen for all these many hundreds of years. But that's what happened to the Japanese, and I can't forget that. I simply cannot get it out of my mind.
Well, let me ask Dr. Olento an extension of that question. Do you think there's possible a rollback even in Brazil?
Well, I believe that every situation is reversible. But if there is one situation that is reversible, perhaps that's the Brazilian one, because we have gone too far. We are an Afro-Latin society, an Afro-Latin country, an Afro-Latin civilization. We have one source of our culture is the Greco-Roman world with the Moorish and Celtic sides of Portuguese civilization. But 50% or perhaps more comes from Africa.
I've heard mention of a word called neo-colonialism, by which I take it, it means that instead of the European countries politically dominating an African country, they will merely economically own its means of production and therefore control it. And this is not as far-fetched as it sounds, because there is quite a furor, say for instance, in a country like Canada, because most of Canada is owned by American capital, and the Canadians feel like they're getting to be a colony of America. Is there a real chance, inasmuch as the African countries are underdeveloped, usually they have one crop tied to the capitalist system of production and they're bound up in that. Is there a real chance that by economic manipulation that a new form of colonialism can be imposed on the African societies, which is fundamentally more crippling than that of the past?
Oh, I think
is it
that,
reversible?
I think that there is always a chance that you slide into a position in which your independence is a sham. But whether you do that depends very much upon yourself. If you have a government of rogues, a government of corrupt people, then no amount of prayer will save you from that sort of situation. But if you have a government of determined people who are prepared to welcome international economic cooperation, but keeping their eyes open all the time, as the lawyer says, caveat emptor, watching their own guns all the time, it seems to me that they can develop with assistance from abroad without sliding into a neo-colonialist position. So my answer is that it is possible, it can happen, and it will happen unless we have dedicated governments who are prepared to work for the advancement of the standard of living of their community as a whole.
Thank you. Now let's get to the next question.
My name is Harold Lazarus. May I ask a question of Dr. Franklin or of any of the other gentlemen on the panel that want to respond to it? The question is a short one, maybe not a terribly easy one to answer. What might people, good-intentioned people, do in their own communities to attempt to assure a better future for the Negro in that community than was true in his past? Dr. Franklin.
When I was teaching at Brooklyn College, one of my colleagues who had spent his holiday, spring holiday in Florida, came rushing into my office. He was a member of another department, and And he said, I've just come from the South. I'm so distressed. I'm so upset. I don't know what to do, and I've come to you for help. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to tell me what I can do to help improve the situation of the Negro. He said, because I've now seen it in its rawest, worst, crudest form, and I must do something. And I took him to the window of my office, and I pointed to the apartment building in Flatbush. And I said, you've got your work cut out. Try to get a Negro in that apartment building. What I'm trying to suggest really is that we do have in every community that I know anything about in this country a vast array of problems that run the gamut from employment to housing to education and to just plain human relations, and that there's work for each and every person. Now, one has first of all to have some commitment, and I'm sure that you're asking only about people who do. Then one has secondly to ask himself, what is it that he can do? And I don't believe anyone can answer that question for you. We've been having a great time this summer in Chicago, and some of us have been lying down in the streets, and some of us have been standing, on the sidewalk, and others have been marching, and others have been ringing doorbells, and others have been holding meetings and speaking, and others have been working with little children and so forth. We have, all of us, I think, some talent, and we have to ask ourselves what is it we can do. First, we have to see the problem, and we'll, as I think you do, you see it in your own community, and not in, Ocala, Florida somewhere. See it right in your own community, probably in your own block. And secondly, to be certain that you have a commitment to try to do something. And thirdly, ask, what are your talents? They may be writing, they may be speaking, they may be marching, they may be lying down in the streets, whatever they are, to improve the lot of mankind. That seems to me where you ought to be. And that's about all I can say. I cannot be specific without knowing specifically what one's talents and temperament are. Some people just cannot lie down in the streets. I happen to be one. But I can stand on the sidewalk, and maybe you can too. That's all I can say about that.
Are there any other questions from our audience? Which is quite a lively one, I must say. Any other questions? Any other unsolved problems we can dispose of for you? Mr. Charlie Griffin.
My name is Charles Griffin. I would address my question to Mr. Davidson. I wonder if the major powers of the world realize the menace of racism as it's exemplified by apartheid in South Africa.
Well, if they don't realize it, they must be extremely hard of hearing, because it's not for lack of telling them. I would think that they do realize it, but my answer would be on slightly different lines. And that is this, and it's been mentioned, I think that you mentioned it at the beginning, that the reason why I would be counted perhaps on this platform as a pessimist is not simply that complacency hasn't really got much place here, but also because the fact of the matter is that none of these really basic problems, on world terms, are at the present moment being solved. The fact is that the poor nations are getting poorer, and most of them happen to be colored, and the rich nations are getting richer, and most of them happen to be Caucasian, or whatever it may be. And until these kind of basic problems are solved, it's extremely hard to see how the more limited ones are going to be solved. For instance, in the case of Africa, the Africans have liberated themselves with great vigor and courage and success in the last 10 or 15 years. Fact remains that their economic situation in the world has been gradually getting worse and worse during that very same period vis-à-vis the rich nations, if only because the terms of trade, the scissors between the price of exports and the price of their imports has gone heavily against them, I think I'm right in this, ever since about 1953 or 4. And subject to correction, it seems to me very likely that all the sum of all the aid that has been given to all the so-called undeveloped countries is much less in terms of gain for them than the loss which they have suffered through these adverse terms of trade. And there is one particular case where it seems to me that the world had better address itself to without any loss of time. Because until that process of impoverishment and enrichment is modified and indeed reversed, altered, got over, overcome, we shan't get very far.
Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished members of the panel, it seems that our time is about up. I'd like to take these last few minutes to thank these gentlemen who took time out to come and be with us this afternoon. Dr. John A. Davis, American Society on Africa, Dr. Antonio Olinto, critic and writer from Brazil, Chief S.O. Adebo, Nigerian ambassador to the United Nations, Dr. John Hope Franklin, historian from University of Chicago, Mr. Basil Davidson, a British Africanist who came all the way over to join our discussion. Obviously, we couldn't begin to cover all of this particular problem. On the other hand, it is the problem of mankind that we deal with. We will never cover it all. We merely try and throw enough light on the problem to enable those of us who do want to be of help to find a little more reason or a little more method by which they can achieve their objective. I think that man has a great future, and if I'm a pessimist, it's a short-term pessimism. I'm of the theater, and one of the greatest art forms is the tragic art, by which the protagonist dies, but in his dying, he learns quite a lot. And with that, I'd like to bid you all good night. I was a little nervous at first. No, wonderful. Thank you, sir. Glad you got hold.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.